Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third knowledge sharing webinar series. Now, this web conference is part of the Asia Leadership Program that we designed this and offered to the participants of the Asia Leadership Program face-to-face towards the end of this month. And also it is open to alumni and ADB staff who are interested in joining. A little bit about the Asia Leadership Program. The program is trying to encourage and induce the potential leaders to lead the changes that are needed to deal with forever rising developmental challenges in everywhere. And this knowledge sharing webinar series is actually one of the full components of the program. We have these webinars, e-learnings, and also actively trying to engage you into the community of leaders. So if you frequently visit the Asia Leadership web pages, you'll find a way to share your thoughts and ideas with other colleagues all around the world. Now, today's webinar is entitled Crafting Compelling Messages. We'll discuss about the need to frame ideas into compelling messages to help you get the attention of key stakeholders. And we already sent you a link to the webinar events in the event page in the K-Learn. There's a list of resources that we recommended for your advanced reading. These include Chapter 1 of the Master Communicator's Handbook, written by our speakers today, as well as 2 blog articles published in the Huffington Post, both written also by one of our speakers. We were hoping that you have able to read it. Also, the last point before we begin the webinar, you can stay connected to the topic of today by sending us your feedbacks, stay engaged in the discussions, and also reviewing the materials with others. Now, let me introduce today's resource speakers. Our 2 speakers today are Tim Ward and Teresa Erickson. They are the owners of the Intermediary Communications, have been speakers in our webinar last year. Together, they have led hundreds of communication workshops around the world, working with organizations such as WWF, the World Bank, ADB, and the United Nations, among others. Born in Portugal, Ms. Teresa worked with the Voice of America for 19 years as a producer and editor, where she also hosted the flagship public affairs programs with about 90 million listeners a week. She has voiced award-winning documentaries for broadcast in Brazil and Portugal. Tim is former print journalist and a well-known author in his native Canada. He has written 8 books, including the bestseller, What the Buddha Never Taught, and Indestructible You, which Shai Tubali. Tim is also publisher of Changemaker books. Let me now turn over to Tim and Teresa for their webinar on crafting compelling messages.
Hello, everybody.
Tim and Teresa.
Here's what we're going to cover today. First of all, we're going to talk about how to communicate so that people really get your message clearly. And I'll speak about a new idea about communication, and then Teresa will tell you how you can incorporate this new idea in your messages. And then we'll take a look at how you can use the idea of messaging and incorporate that into a plan of action for when you are working to convince partners, collaborators, or those within your ministries to take on a new idea or new innovation. And then we're going to talk about 2 small case studies about how actual influencers have succeeded in creating change in different countries in Asia. And then we'll have time for your questions. I'm going to start now with our big idea. Many people think of communication as simply saying what's on their mind, and they believe it's almost like a data transfer, sharing one computer file between one computer and another. But in fact, that's not really true. We think that we're just easily transferring information, but in reality, often when we try to share ideas, they seem to just bounce off the mind of the person we're speaking to. It's difficult to get others to accept new ideas, to want to take them in, make them their own, and act based on what you say. It takes skill, practice, and some good techniques to do this well. We're going to share some of those techniques with you now. The big idea we want to share with you is called a meme. Now, some of you may have heard this word before, particularly in use in the internet. People talk about internet memes often. And what they mean by that is something that shows up in their Twitter feed or Facebook or social media as a saying or perhaps a picture that's really interesting, and that picture gets passed around so that everybody seems to see it. And that's the meaning, the technical meaning of the word meme. It's an idea that gets passed on, that gets replicated. Most of us, when we share our ideas, we think about just convincing the person in front of us. But a meme is a way of structuring an idea so that it not only gets passed on to one person, but the person you speak to is then capable of passing it on to others. Now, where did this idea come from? It came from Richard Dawkins, a philosopher of science, who was the first to realize that our ideas have actually become a second driver of human evolution. Just like our gene code information chemically in the molecules of our DNA, and that those changes help us adapt to our environment and they get passed on from parent to offspring. So ideas are encoded in the neural network of our minds, and those electrical impulses get passed on from one mind to another. The big difference is when genetic ideas are passed on, it's very slow from parent to offspring, but ideas can be passed very quickly throughout a population. And it's our ideas that have helped humanity become such a strong and powerful species on the planet. So what kinds of things can be considered ideas that can be passed on? Well, the first is something like a friendly emoticon, that little smiley face that when you first saw it, you thought, that's cute, and you passed it on to others. If you passed it on, it's an idea like a meme. It can also be a big idea, something that's capable of changing how we use energy on this planet, like the idea of a carbon footprint. It can even be something as annoying as a song that gets stuck in your head. And songs are very good memes. The song lyrics in the tune plays over and over in our head, and something like Psy's famous song Gangnam Style has actually been viewed by over 2 billion people on YouTube. And even a piece of technology can be considered a meme. We see someone with a cell phone or a smartphone and we think, that's so useful, I want one. So we go out and get one. The idea has been passed on. So when you're communicating, you want to think, how can my ideas be passed on well? And I'm now going to turn it over to Teresa, who's going to share with you 4 ways to pass ideas on well.
So we take a look at some of the development memes that in the development community organizations are trying to get across. And these are some of the ones that we hear over and over: inclusive growth, capacity building, gender mainstreaming. And you can see that even though there is an attempt to make these into memes, into things that are memorable, they're heavy. And it's hard to understand what capacity building means, what gender mainstreaming means. It's too vague. So these are not successful memes in the way that we look at them as stale memes and ones that aren't catchy enough to keep replicating. So you also want to make people want to pass on your memes. So I've taken a look at meme theory, and in terms of applying it to messages, I've come up with 4 C's that you can try to do to your messages to make them more like memes that will be successful and will be remembered. So let's take a look at what those 4 C's are. The first is to be concise. The best messages are shorter rather than longer. And that's obvious because it's hard to remember long sentences or long words. So 2 short sentences are better than one very long sentence. And here the difficulty with development and government ministers is that it's tempting to try to explain everything, to be comprehensive, but messages are supposed to simply be like a flower attracting bees. If you're a bee, you see the flower and then you want to go deeper if you see that the flower is pretty to get more information. So your messages are like flowers, but they can't explain everything. This is a great example to simplify your messages. This was the IPCC message before the COP21 in Paris. I'm not going to read it to you because it's so long, and it's all one sentence. But you can see that even by the third line, your brain has no idea what's happening here, what it's talking about. So this successful message. And we actually took a crack at simplifying this message. And if you will look at the next slide, this is what that message was really saying. Climate change has put the planet on a path to extinction. More than half the animals, plants, and fish that we have now may be gone forever. So that's what that was trying to say. So you have to do this with your own messages. Write them down in all its complexity and then see how simple you can get it, how much more concise you can go. We worked with IFC on one of their recent reports about women in business. We thought this was a very good message for a rather complicated report. Private sector development is stronger and the benefits more widespread when women are full participants in the process. So that's a nice and simple message for a report. Here's the most concise message that we worked with a client. This was with Coca-Cola and WWF on their polar bear campaign. The message simply was, no ice, no bears. So that's as simple as you can make it. The second C is to be concrete. As humans, we are more likely to remember something if it's got a concrete, tangible word applied to it, a word picture. If I say pink elephant to you, everybody thinks of a pink elephant. When we hear jargon or technical terms or conceptual words like capacity building, there is no picture attached to that, so we're less likely to remember that. So whenever possible, you want to use visual language in your messages. That means you have to translate conceptual language that's not visual into more concrete language. So if you're talking about transport infrastructure, do you mean a road? Are you talking about a bridge? I can see a road and a bridge, but I can't see transport infrastructure. Even reduce carbon emissions, you probably mean burn less oil, coal, or gas. Capacity building, are you talking about building skills and expertise in a certain sector? It's better to say exactly what you mean than to rely on these general terms, because these kinds of terms, we know what they mean, but they just wash over us and we tune them out. So we worked with a report in the U.S. on the housing policy, and we worked with them on this message to make it more concrete. America's housing policy is broken. If we don't fix the foundation, it's only a matter of time before it collapses on all of us. So this is a way to make a message on policy much more concrete. And Davos has started putting out their most popular quotes and most tweeted quotes of the whole meeting. And the winner this year was President Xi of China from one of his speeches. And this is what he said. We've had our fair share of choking in the water. We've encountered whirlpools and choppy waves, but we have learned how to swim in the process. Very visual. This was the most tweeted quote of the whole conference. And as I was reading the president's whole speech, it was peppered with all of this kind of visual language. So I could tell that he was strategically writing his speech in this way so that it would be memorable and so that it would be talked about and repeated. And he succeeded in that because of this concrete nature of his speech. The third C is connected to what we care about. We're more likely to remember something if it's relevant to us, or rather than if it's something esoteric that we don't know very much about. So whenever possible, put people in the picture. We all care about people, and often messages leave people out. So here's another winner from Davos. For workers, there are no jobs on a dead planet. So we care about workers and jobs and our planet. This is from WWF. I am not a rug. This immediately hits us about what we care about, wild animals and tigers. So as soon as we read this and we see this, we care, and so we're more likely to remember it. And the fourth C is catchy. If there's a way to make your messages have a metaphor that's evocative, dramatic words that we remember, it can rhyme or have repetition, things said in threes tend to be very catchy. So even this simple phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle, that's a catchy way of talking about what we do with our waste. This is an example from another group we worked with. Giving women access to contraceptives saves lives, saves money, saves the planet. Just saying those three saves makes it something more memorable. This has become very popular. There is no planet B. Nobody really knows who started this saying, but it's all over the place. World leaders are using it. It was up in lights for the COP21 in Paris, on the Eiffel Tower. So this is very catchy. There is no planet B. So these, in sum, are the 4 C's to making messages stick and be remembered. You want to make sure that your best messages are concise, concrete, so they're visual. We can see something in them. Connected to what we care about, so relevant to us. And finally, catchy. Can you make it rhyme? Can you have some repetition in it? Does it mirror a saying that we all know? So you want to make it catchy. So this is homework for all of you, is to think about how you can go ahead and improve your messages that you're working on right now. So we invite you to think about a message that you're trying to convey or an idea, write it down, and revise it according to those 4 C's. Make it more concise. See if you can make it more concrete and visual. Make sure that it's relevant to your audience, your target audience, and then see if you can make it catchy. So that's something that I challenge all of you to work on after this webinar.
And in fact, if during the Q&A session, you've got an idea that you would like to share with us to give you a sense of whether or not we think it's made a good meme, it's concise, concrete, connected, and catchy, you can go ahead and tell us that during the Q&A. And now we're going to turn to our next section, which is called Creating a Narrative for Your Action Plan. Now, much of the work that you're going to be doing during the Asia Leadership Program in Tokyo is going to be working on a practical action plan for something that you've learned or you've been working on that you really want to make policy, make a reality in your countries. So this section here is about how to take that action plan and communicate it effectively. And we think that putting a plan inside a narrative, a story, is a great way to have people pay attention when you're telling it, remember it afterwards, and also want to make your story their story too. So we'll go through this short presentation and then we'll take your questions in the Q&A to follow. Often when people start describing their action plan, they begin by describing the problem that they're facing. And this is good. What we've noticed in working with many groups and teams over the years is that people tend to spend too much time on describing the problem. Now, if your audience already knows the problem, if you spend too much time talking about it, you're liable to bore them or maybe even offend them if they think you think that they don't really understand what the problem is. So if they know the problem, you should be able to describe it in just a few sentences. On the other hand, if they don't know the problem, it's very difficult in a short presentation to actually convince people that there is a problem where they don't see one already. So if people don't see there's a problem, it takes a lot more work to convince them that there's something that needs to be solved before you can even begin to go into an action plan. So the first lesson is to describe your problem concisely and quickly. And just as quickly, say why it's important to solve this problem now. And do it from the point of view of your audience. What are their concerns that this problem creates? And how can solving it make their concerns go away? After you've explained the problem, now you can introduce your new idea. And when you introduce your new idea or innovation for the change you want to make, be sure that you give people what we call the big picture first. That big picture, that's your meme. That's your idea that you want to get across and have people take up with you as an approach. Now, what we often see, though, is instead of describing a big idea, people start by diving into their plan of action and start explaining the bits and pieces of their solution. So it's like you're handing them pieces of a puzzle. And you think that by handing people lots of pieces of the puzzle, little bits of how you're going to solve this problem or how your plan of action is going to work, steps 1, A, B, C, D, E, that you're giving them the information they need to make sense of your approach. But in fact, you're not. If you just give people bits of information, you end up like this. You just give them a pile of puzzle pieces. But it doesn't easily fit together. They don't know what you're really talking about if you dive right into the plan. So you want to give them the big picture first. Think of this as like the puzzle box. Show them the picture on the puzzle box first, and that helps them then see how those individual pieces fit together into solving the problem and realizing your new idea. So this is where your meme, your well-crafted idea, comes into play. It's the big picture you need to explain before you give your plan of action. Once you've done that, you're ready to go into the plan of action itself. Now, during much of the Asia Leadership Program, you're going to be working on very thorough plans of action. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here on describing those parts. I'm just going to give you a general roadmap of the things that are important. The first part of the plan of action should be what immediately follows from the idea. What are the things that you need to do? The chronology of we need to do this, then that, then this. However, there's more. You can't just explain what the steps of the action are. You need to also identify and address the challenges and the obstacles in the way. It's very important for those who are listening to your idea that they hear you have thought through what some roadblocks could be, what some things that might make it difficult to execute could be. And in hearing how you handle or how you think you can resolve those difficulties, your idea seems much more realistic. So think about what the problems are, and in your plan of action, explain how you're going to address them and solve them. Don't ignore them. And then once you've done that, you can say to the person that you are explaining your ideas to, what is the next step? Or if you're just starting, what's the first step? Tell them where they are right now in the story of your idea becoming a reality. Often people stop after just having explained the plan. It's very important that you do this next step, which is envision the result. How will things be different as a result of your plan of action succeeding? How will people's lives change in your countries? And can these results be scaled up in other communities, in other industries, across different ministries? So look not only to the specific change your idea could create, but the possibilities for even greater change. This is important because it can inspire people to see how a different world can happen when your idea is put in action. Finally, you want to end by inviting your audience to join you, whether it's a minister or a group of colleagues or perhaps outside partners or people from other ministries or other groups within your country. Make a specific request to them. Tell them what you need from them to have your idea become a reality. It might be their own ideas, it might be their knowledge, their resources, it might be funding. Be very specific about what you're asking them to contribute so that they know what you want. Be open to their ideas. They may think of things that are new ways to accomplish your goals, or you may come to them for resources, but they may actually be offering you partnerships. So be flexible with what they are willing to contribute to your idea. And finally, be willing to share ownership. You may have a great idea. Others may have something similar. The possibility of you working together is great if you can share the ownership of something good. I'm going to now walk you through an example that is actually a real story of somebody who wanted to help a capital city create big change. And these are the three main steps that he went through. I'm going to say, first of all, the language he used in describing the problem in his cities. Here's what he said. Our country's automobiles are old. They pollute the city, causing lung disease and illness in children. They also contribute to climate change. And when oil prices rise, the government spends millions on fuel subsidies. The nation simply can't afford it. So how can we solve this problem? So in just a few sentences, he made clear what the problem was. Probably the people knew about it already, but he reminded them that this is a problem the country can't afford and needs to solve. The step 2 is action, starting with the big idea. The big idea, he says like this. What if we could replace our old cars with affordable, clean, electric cars? Notice how clear and simple that is. You have the old cars, dirty old cars, and then you have the affordable, clean, new cars. Then he walked through some of the reasons that would allow this to happen. The first is that the electric motor technology now exists that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago to really make a full shift to electric cars. The technology was there. Second, and this is a unique advantage of this particular country, they had excess hydropower. They were producing more power than use. And his idea was, why not offer citizens who switch to electric cars 5 years of free electric charges? Basically, third, getting some feedback.
Tim, I think we're losing your audio.
I'm hearing a lot of feedback. It doesn't sound like
Yes.
it's coming from my end. Can you hear me?
Okay, it's okay.
Okay, good. Okay. Third, cost used to be an obstacle. Our country now qualifies for climate fund grants, like in the Green Climate Fund, and for low price loans that can help us afford this transition. So he handled some of the base to his idea becoming a reality. Now the result. So having laid out his plan, he wants to make sure that his audience can see what the end will be. In this case, his audience was the mayor of a capital city. He knew that for that mayor, what was really important was that the stature of his city be one comparable with the best cities in Western Europe. So here's what he said to end his presentation. With this plan, I envisioned that in 5 years we could transform the city into a clean, healthy place to live, reduce our greenhouse gases by 20%, and be a model to rival Copenhagen and Stockholm. And if we choose to build an electric car factory in our city, we could actually become the regional leader as an electric car maker. So you see here at the end, he's talking about scaling up. What's the possibility for even greater transformation? So to sum up, here are the 3 steps in what we call the narrative of change template, which includes an action plan. It starts with clearly identifying the problem and saying why solving it is important. Then giving the big picture first, your meme, your idea, followed by the plan of action. And making sure your plan of action includes obstacles and challenges to resolve so that it seems real. And then the first step, where are you now? And then the third and final step, the result, how will lives change, and how can you scale up for lasting transformation? And then at the end, inviting your audience to join you. So that's our 3-step template. When we meet again in Tokyo, we'll be giving you this template to work with as you work on your action plan. And that's the end of this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Tim and Teresa, for this wonderful framework that are very practical and very too simple in a way. That I always think of the communication because, as you all understand, that it requires tremendous patience, energy, and also effort to communicate with the other person. Whenever I say something, I also need to make sure that they have the right understanding of what I said. But then often that doesn't easily happen because we're all busy and then just trying to run away. And that's a sort of a very difficult part. And especially for the government officials, this is like the tools that the framework that you provided us is most likely for them, it's sounding like the language of the politician. That any sort of educated, well-balanced thought leaders, they tend to convey the comprehensive details of what they do and then how they have reached to that conclusion. On the other hand, communication is more of trying to win their attention and then persuade the person to agree with you, which is much more like a politician's language in a way. So naturally, it's quite difficult for them to get used to the idea of sort of a totally different style of communication that are needed for their daily work. So if you have any insights on this.
Mm-hmm. I would say that it's because most, especially when you're caught up in your daily life of the work that you're trying to get across and trying to communicate to people, you tend to forget that communication is not about output. It's not about the words that I say. That's just dissemination. Communication is about impact. Now, I remind people that when you do give a talk, nobody's going to remember every word you say. That's impossible. So you have to think about what's the most memorable piece of my talk today? What are the moments that people will remember? And I don't think anybody really takes a look at their communication from an objective point of view to say, am I saying anything that stands out, that's dramatic, that would interest me? So you can't just say, I'm going to say these words and dump the words out on another person because they simply won't remember them. Mm. So you always have to think about packaging your information in an interesting way to that audience. And I think a lot of us think about communication from the point of view of what do I have to say instead of from the viewpoint of what does this audience really care about and how can I say it in a way that will make them interested in what I have to say?
And Young, if I can come back to your excellent point, which is that politicians are often really good at these sort of big ideas, speaking in memes and expressions that give the overview, and even if they may sometimes be short on details, because they know that's what influences people and that's what motivates people. And until you can do that part well, you won't have people paying enough attention to listen to the granular details, which policy experts, like those of you who are attending the Asia Leadership Program, you policy experts have the granular details and the knowledge and the resources to make good decisions. But until you get the attention and attract the interest, well, many good ideas just end up dead on a shelf that nobody's read or nobody's acted on. So this is, to us, the missing link. Getting your ideas framed compellingly and interestingly helps get a good hearing for the rigorous work that you're capable of. And if I can just say, so Young, I've got these 2 short case studies, which I'm ready to go into, from actual policy who shared some of their insights on how to be influential with us. So I'd like to talk first about a case in Mongolia. And we've had the good pleasure to work with the former Environment Minister, Oyen Sanja Soren, who founded the Civil Will Party in 1998. And she told us about what it was like to be able to create change as a political outsider. She started off with a very small party that won enough seats in the election that she was part of a coalition and became part of a grant coalition that was able to get its own small party's platform adopted as the governing coalition's platform. And that meant that just by having things in the platform, by having language in the platform, she got a seat chairing an action committee on creating things like Mongolia's first Freedom of Information Act, their Anti-Corruption Act, and their conflict of interest legislation. So getting those big ideas into the system was the first part, even as a minority party. She did this again in her second time in government when she was the Minister of the Environment, with ideas that originally came from the Green Party. They were in the party platform, but having won the election, they suddenly became part of action plans where people actually crafting the policy now could deal with these big ideas. And her best insights here were what happened when party platform ideas came into the groups, the working groups on creating action plans. She said, first of all, something rather interesting. She said, lots of politicians, they like the power plays. They like the big picture. It's hard, actually, for politicians to sit down and really focus on the nitty-gritty details of an action plan. That's grinding. That, she said, though, is where people who are willing to do the work can have a lot of influence. She said what she noticed, though, is often in these meetings, very capable policy people were just sitting quietly, waiting to be asked, what do they think? And she said, in her opinion, that's the wrong approach. That if you've got a seat at the table, you should make good suggestions. She said quite clearly, never underestimate the power of suggestion. So if you've got a seat at the table in those action plans, go ahead and make suggestions. Your minister may not have thought of them him or herself and might be quite open to them. And when you do make suggestions, she said it's important to be prepared, to really do your homework. So to craft a good action plan yourself, to not just have an idea, but to have a plan with facts and numbers and actions to back it up. She also said persistence is really important. Don't give up easily. If you've got a good idea, be persistent. And finally, she said, be ready to seek out allies. And if other people have similar ideas, work towards compromise. She said with the Green Party, they didn't get everything they wanted, but they got about 60% of their party platform either turned into legislation or government policy. Percent is a big win. So those were the main things we learned from the Mongolia example shared by Oyen Sanja Soren. Young, let me throw that back to you for a second. Do you have something you'd like to reflect on before I move to the second case study?
Please go ahead with the second case.
So the second case is something that took place in the past few years in the Mekong countries, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. These three countries were part of a project which was overseen by the Asia Development Bank, funded by the Nordic Development Agency, and required the collaboration and partnership of many organizations, including IGES, which had an instrumental role in its success. The idea that they wanted to bring to these countries was that women have a key role to play in climate change mitigation, in preventing some damage that climate change causes, by preventing climate change. Now, most people, when they think about women and climate change, they think about adaptation, that women may be more vulnerable, may suffer more due to the effects of climate change. This new idea is that women actually have a very strong role to play in preventing climate change. Why? Because at the household level, women are the ones who use natural resources, who are often in charge of things like farming techniques, in charge of cooking, in charge of gathering fuel wood to cook fires for the family. So having women make choices that use less fuel, that harness biogas so that methane isn't released into the sky, and that the clean fuel of methane gas can be used for cooking. These are things that, if done widely through a country, can actually make a difference in a nation's greenhouse gas emissions. But this was not an idea that was in the minds of most people in government or in business, because it wasn't just something that could happen at a policy level. It had to also happen on the ground. Women buying different kinds of stoves, using different kinds of technology. So those who had this idea had to create big coalitions with lots of different groups, and they wanted to do it not just in one country, but in 3 neighboring countries, so that they could also share their experiences and resources with each other. And that was one of the key things. If you don't already have a seat at the table, how can you get a seat at the policy-making table? That was one of their big challenges. And some of the lessons that they had along the way were, first of all, that you've got to find allies. So they looked around, they found places like the Lao Women's Union, they found people in some women's ministries who were interested in this. They found people, surprisingly, perhaps in the agriculture ministry in Cambodia, who were very interested in this. Why? Because women have a very, very large role in agricultural work in Cambodia. So finding some allies allowed them to start connecting together and seeing who could help them get into the tables where policy decisions were being made. Now, fortunately, at that time, a lot of climate financing was coming available. Organizations like the Green Climate Fund were getting set up. And these new international organizations have a strong gender lens. You have to pay attention to gender if you want to get grants from the Green Climate Fund. So suddenly, the availability of financing made policymakers look again at what they needed to do to be compliant to these gender regulations that were part of these grant processes. And the groundwork that was being done in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam allowed those nations to say, hey, wait a minute, these people are working on that. And indeed, the people who were managing the overall project saw this as an opportunity, and they went to work providing the needed training. This is the second thing that's really important, making sure that people get the skills so that they can develop the capabilities to do key jobs that need to be done. And so the women that they were working with inside governments became trained at writing grant proposals, and they started getting some of these grants. And once they started getting the grants, others at the policymaking tables started respecting them, started listening to them. Indeed, much more training needed to take place, including training for more senior government officials on understanding that women were actually capable of taking leadership roles. Indeed, that was a big mindset change. And then at the other end, working with local villages and bringing women into local supply chains, you needed to train suppliers to see that women could actually do the roles of being salespersons. They trained women to make biogas stoves. And in Cambodia, they even trained groups of women whose limbs had been mangled in landmine accidents. They trained them, so they had a whole special unit working to create special, more efficient cook stoves. So training needed to go up and down, and this was really the final thing that this whole Mekong initiative brought out, and that is that when you have new knowledge, you have to share it up with your ministry and down to the level of people who are going to be doing the work, and then also out, sharing with different organizations. And ultimately, these 3 nations had a conference in which they wanted to share their knowledge of what they'd accomplished with other international organizations and with other countries, so that women's role in climate change mitigation could be better appreciated and better spread. It's a transformational story, and indeed both of these stories are described in the 2 articles that we've written and that are up in the Huffington Post website, and you've got those links. We invite you to read the stories, and then you're more than welcome to contact us or the people whose stories they are to find out more about them. Young, back over to you. That's the end.
Thank you, Tim. That's a wonderful, compelling 2 case stories that reminds me of the importance of leading from below. Many of us, the officials, especially in a sort of a hierarchical government structure, that they tend to believe that they have nothing or the capability of making changes until they're told to. But then the very importance of recognizing, staying committed, and engaging people, mobilizing political support to make the real changes, the leading from below, it's really relevant stories for the many of us. Thank you so much. Now I will open it to the participants if they have any question they would want to ask, or any experience of yours that you also wanted to share with us.
Tim and Teresa, thank you so much. Thank you, Young. I remember joining your two ADB programs. One is the expert presenter, where I had you guys for 3 days, and the negotiating skills. And I remember leaving both of them wanting more of both of you, and I'm glad I got a little bit.
Thank you. We remember you very.
Yes, I'm glad. So now we are bringing, I don't know if my clients have joined from the other end, we're bringing Kolkata City officials to the ALP, inshallah, because we're still waiting for the nomination, but I'm sure it'll come. Basically, we in ADB have been working with Kolkata for almost 20 years now. It's one of these very rare opportunity of having to work with a large metro city in India. And I think Kolkata is the only one we've got. Or anywhere, really. I don't know if we have persistently worked with any city for nearly 2 decades. So lots of good lessons. But in crafting, I want to go back to your 4 C's and the message of having a catchy line that not only us to describe our partnership with Kolkata City that we can use, also our officials in influencing their own policymakers. I'll just take 1 minute to give example of what we're doing. We are investing quite a lot. Actually, over the last 2 decades, it's coming closer to $1 billion of ADB's investment in water supply, in sewage and drainage generally, and now also in climate, making Kolkata climate resilient. If you sum it all, we could say it's really making Kolkata clean and climate resilient. So I think in terms of presenting what we are trying to do together, internally, externally, does it sum up as, is it catchy enough, making Kolkata clean, climate resilient, or
yeah, the problem with that word resilient, I find that anytime a word has 3 syllables, it's not going to be very catchy. Like the shorter words, for some reason, I think it's just that our brain, that's just the way that our brains work. They're catchier. So maybe if you can find three things, clean,
green, smart.
Clean, smart. That's great. That's great. And so the climate resilient part will be like your next sentence, or when you start to explain what you mean, you can bring in the climate resilient. But you need to have that one line that people will be intrigued and say, oh, tell me more about that. And that's really what we're trying to get at. That these messages are designed to get people intrigued. And to help them remember.
So here's what I'd suggest. Kolkata is named after the goddess Kali. And you could say we want the city to be like the goddess, after pure, strong, and wise.
She's the goddess of destruction. You know that.
Oh, that's true. But also transformation. Also transformation.
True.
I think
I like that. I'll use
I
that
kind
in
of
my
found
presentation.
the clean, green, and smart, because I think the clean and the green
Yeah.
rhyme together, and then the smart is also a short word, and everybody wants to be smart. So I really like that. And you came up with that so quickly. I also find that it doesn't take that long to come up with something more catchy. You know, you just did it in 5 minutes. So imagine if you had 20 minutes.
We have been working. We are also investing in making them smart, in making them sort of transform into the new generation. So it was at the back of my mind. But climate resilient, ADB loves climate resilient. Everybody responds to this is the new jargon here.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And it's the concept is really important.
Right.
But it doesn't catch the imagination.
Yeah.
True.
And what I like about the clean, green, and smart is then your next sentence can say, we want to be clean, and then explain clean. We want to be green, and then that's where you can explain, the climate resilient part. And we want to be smart. So it's also a great organizing principle for whatever you're going to talk about next.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we'll stick to clean, green, smart.
Okay, great. It was nice to talk to you again.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you.
Thank you. I just realized that I used climate resilient, sustainable, and inclusive growth at urban development as describing the Asia Leadership Program. But yeah, probably have to had given a much deeper thought then. Well, anyway, anybody else who may want to make a point or have question? So I guess the message was so clear and sound that no one has any questions. So thank you again for the wonderful webinar, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you there, and also all the participants. For the participants, again, the reminder that you can still contact us and stay engaged with us until the face-to-face program and even after. That please provide us your feedback. You stay on as part of the community of leaders. Provide us your thoughts, share your perspectives, so that we can engage in a much more deeper exchange of ideas. The next webinar will be done in June 13, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Manila time. And we'll have Dr. Junichi Fujino of the Institute for Global Environment Strategies, IGES, who will talk about networking practices of sustainable cities in Asia Pacific. We'll email you details of this upcoming webinar, as we do always. And that's it.